Jerry Krause. Jerry Krause didn't just break up a dynasty, he scheduled its demolition before it was even finished. Before the Bulls played a single game, in the 1997 to 1998 season, Krause had already told Phil Jackson it would be his last year, regardless of what happened. It didn't matter if they went 82-0, the decision was already made. Jackson had 5 championships at that point, and went on to win a 6th that very season. Michael Jordan responded by publicly stating he wouldn't play for any other Bulls coach, and Krause didn't blink. Jordan, Jackson, and Scottie Pippen were all headed toward uncertainty, and Krause let it happen. What made this stubbornness different is that it wasn't reactive. Krause had believed for years that organizations win championships, not individual stars. He wanted credit for drafting Horace Grant, trading for Pippen, hiring Jackson, and acquiring Dennis Rodman, despite criticism at every turn. That belief created years of tension, with the players receiving all the public recognition. After the second three-peat in 1998, with Jordan still elite, Pippen still productive, and Rodman still active, Krause chose to rebuild instead of extend the run. The aftermath was immediate. Chicago went from champions to 13-37 during the lockout season and stayed near the bottom of the standings for years. Krause never reversed course and kept defending the logic behind the decision until the very end. The same stubbornness that helped build one of the greatest dynasties in sports history is exactly what dismantled it. DeAndre Ayton. DeAndre Ayton was the first overall pick in the 2018 draft, selected ahead of Luka and Trae Young. At 7 feet tall, with elite athleticism and soft hands around the basket, the tools were never the question. Throughout his entire career, the debate was never really about talent. It was always about something harder to measure. During Phoenix's 2021 finals run, Ayton looked like the center the Suns had drafted him to be. Then things shifted. Tensions developed. Questions about effort and commitment surfaced, and the Suns eventually moved him as part of the structure around the Damian Lillard trade that sent Ayton to Portland. Many expected a clean start with the Trailblazers. Instead, the same themes followed him. Reports described behavioral concerns including habitual lateness, frustration incidents, and broader issues around team culture. Portland didn't just bench him or reduce his role. They bought out his contract entirely, choosing to absorb the financial hit rather than keep him on the roster. That decision stands out because teams almost never do that with former #1 overall picks still in their prime years. Ayton was still averaging double-digit points and rebounds when Portland walked away. Every coaching staff that worked with him pointed toward the same gap: flashes of all-star caliber play, followed by stretches where the effort and physicality simply didn't match the physical gifts. Multiple coaches asked for more defensive intensity and more consistency as a rim protector. The results never fully matched the requests. Tom Thibodeau. Thibs has spent over a decade being criticized for the exact same thing, and he has spent over a decade not caring. The criticism is always about minutes. Whether coaching the Chicago Bulls, the Minnesota Timberwolves, or the New York Knicks, Thibs consistently ranked among the league leaders in starter minutes. The names on the roster kept changing. The debate never did. In Chicago, it was Derrick Rose, Joakim Noah, Jimmy Butler, and Luol Deng carrying heavy workloads. In Minnesota, it was Karl Anthony Towns. In New York, it was the Knicks core, year after year. His defense was always the same. If a player can handle the minutes, the best players should be on the floor. The most telling moment of his Knicks tenure came when Mikal Bridges publicly acknowledged going to Thibs directly and encouraging him to trust the bench more. A player brought it up himself, and it still didn't dramatically change anything. His rotations were consistently criticized for being too short, his bench players for being underutilized, and his starters for being overworked. Analysts, fans, and former players repeated this argument across 3 different cities, spanning more than 10 years. Thibs heard all of it and kept coaching the same way. The irony is that his stubbornness produced real results. He turned Chicago into a contender, ended Minnesota's 14-year playoff drought, and restored credibility to New York. The same trait that generated endless criticism also generated genuine success, which is exactly why he never felt the need to change. By the way, if you guys want to subscribe, I'm going to be posting every day. Thanks. Anyways, Joey Crawford. Joey Crawford spent decades as one of the most technically active referees in NBA history, and on April 15, 2007, everything came to a head. During a Spurs-Mavericks game, Crawford issued 2 technical fouls to Tim Duncan while Duncan was sitting on the bench. Duncan wasn't even on the court. He was ejected anyway. Commissioner David Stern suspended Crawford indefinitely and kept him out for the rest of the season and the entire playoff. Stern also required Crawford to undergo professional evaluation before returning. Crawford later admitted the incident forced him to seek significantly more psychological counseling than he had ever pursued before. That's how far things had escalated. What makes this fit the stubborn category is that the Duncan incident wasn't a surprise. Crawford had spent years building a reputation for quick technicals and confrontational exchanges with players and coaches. Broadcasters and analysts described him as an official who believed deeply in controlling games through authority. The Duncan ejection wasn't viewed as an isolated mistake. Commentators at the time specifically called it the most visible example of a much longer pattern. Even after receiving one of the harshest referee punishments in the league history, Crawford came back and kept officiating. He ultimately worked more playoff games and finals games than any active referee at the time of his retirement in 2016. The suspension didn't fundamentally change his belief in his own authority. It slowed him down temporarily, and then he kept going, which says everything about how deeply ingrained his approach truly was throughout his career. Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons entered the NBA in 2016 as a 6', 10-point guard with elite vision, transition instincts, and defensive versatility that earned him Rookie of the Year and 3 All-Star selections. The problem was always the same thing. He wouldn't shoot. Year after year, coaches urged him to develop a jump shot. Off-season workout videos appeared regularly showing shooting drills. Games came and went with almost no visible change. In the 2020 to 2021 season, Simmons attempted exactly 10 three-pointers total. By the 2021 playoffs, teams had fully adjusted and were simply daring him to fire from anywhere outside the paint. The most symbolic moment came in Game 7 against Atlanta when Simmons passed up a clear dunk opportunity in the fourth quarter rather than risk drawing a foul. That play didn't create the criticism. It became the face of criticism that had existed since his time at LSU. After Philadelphia's elimination, Simmons made it clear he wanted out. The Sixers tried to repair the relationship. Simmons refused to return and held out through training camp. The team withheld approximately $8,250,000 from his contract and eventually suspended him for conduct detrimental to the team. Most players who request trades eventually accept a resolution. Simmons held the line for months through fines, suspensions, public criticism, and trade uncertainty. He was eventually dealt to Brooklyn in the James Harden trade. The same offensive concerns that defined his Philadelphia years followed him there too. The debate over his shot never stopped following him either. George Karl. George Karl won over 1,100 NBA games across a Hall of Fame career and spent a significant portion of that career in documented conflicts with star players. The list is long. Carmelo Anthony, Ray Allen, Kenyon Martin, DeMarcus Cousins, and J.R. Smith all had notable tensions with Karl at various points. The range of franchises and personalities involved makes it a pattern rather than a series of isolated incidents. With Denver, Karl coached Carmelo to the 2009 Western Conference Final. Despite that shared success, tensions remained throughout. Years after their partnership ended, Karl continued publicly criticizing Anthony in interviews and in his book Furious George, reopening disputes long after they had stopped working together. The response from Kenyon Martin was fierce. Martin strongly objected to Karl's comments and fired back publicly, producing one of the most visible coach-player feuds involving a retired coach criticizing former players from a distance. Even in Seattle and Milwaukee, Karl's relationship with Ray Allen was consistently described as strained, despite coaching one of the greatest shooters in league history. Karl's core belief was that no player should be bigger than the team. That philosophy helped him build competitive rosters across multiple cities. It also put him directly in conflict with superstar personalities who expected different treatment. Most retired coaches eventually soften over time. Karl largely did the opposite. His memoir reignited old conflicts years after the events occurred. Supporters called it honesty. Critics called it an inability to move on. Either way, more than 1,100 wins gave him decades of evidence that his methods worked, and he never stopped defending them. Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler's most famous moment of stubbornness happened in October 2018 when he walked into a Timberwolves practice and challenged everyone in the building: coaches, executives, starters. He led a group of reserves against the first unit and verbally confronted members of the organization throughout the session. This came after helping end Minnesota's 14-year playoff drought in 2018. Butler had grown increasingly frustrated with what he viewed as a lack of accountability from Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins, and made no effort to hide it. Rather than quietly accepting the situation, he demanded a trade and turned the whole thing into one of the most discussed locker room moments in recent NBA history. What separates Butler from most players in conflict situations is that he never softened his message, even as criticism mounted. He publicly defended his competitive standards throughout the backlash and made it consistently clear that those standards existed for a reason. The same pattern appeared in Chicago, where he became the face of the franchise after emerging as an extremely demanding presence. It showed up in Philadelphia, where he clashed with aspects of the offensive structure. It even surfaced in Miami, which isn't easy to do. The Heat are famous for their organizational culture and demanding environment. Yet even there, Butler eventually reached a point where he was unwilling to compromise. By early 2025, Miami suspended him for conduct detrimental to the team. Even after Pat Riley publicly said they wouldn't trade him, Butler held his position. A 31st overall pick who became a 6-time All-Star, built that career entirely on refusing to lower his standards for anyone. Danny Ainge. Danny Ainge built his entire front office reputation around one defining trait: refusing to let emotion drive decision. The clearest example is Isaiah Thomas. Thomas played through a severe hip injury during the 2017 playoff, while simultaneously dealing with the death of his sister. He finished 5th in MVP voting that season and had become one of the most beloved players in Boston franchise history. Most executives would have found it nearly impossible to move someone under those circumstances. Ainge traded him to Cleveland for Kyrie Irving anyway. The public backlash was immediate and significant. Ainge stayed the course. For years, fans and media criticized him for accumulating draft picks without spending them. He ignored the pressure and moved on his own timetable. When trade discussions didn't meet his standards, he walked away regardless of outside noise. Executives around the league consistently described Ainge as one of the most difficult negotiators in professional sports because he rarely deviated from his valuations no matter what others wanted. The Kevin Garnett trade, the Ray Allen trade, the Paul Pierce and Garnett trade to Brooklyn, and the Thomas for Irving deal all reflected the same approach. Ainge consistently chose organizational flexibility over personal attachment and never appeared troubled by the criticism that followed each move. His rebuild after the Pierce-Garnett era was another example. Many observers pushed for aggressive moves immediately. Ainge spent years accumulating assets instead, consistently resisting pressure to spend them prematurely. That patience frustrated fans, but helped create one of the strongest asset collections in the league. Unlike most stubborn personalities, Ainge's version was rarely emotional. It was purely calculated, and he applied it regardless of how unpopular the decision looked at the time. Allen Iverson. Allen Iverson's stubbornness wasn't just about basketball, it was about identity. From the moment he entered the NBA, Iverson rejected the idea that he needed to fit a conventional mold. He openly embraced hip-hop culture, cornrows, tattoos, arm sleeves, and oversized clothing at a time when the league was pushing a very different image of professionalism. Rather than adjusting under criticism, he doubled down and eventually influenced an entire generation of players and fans. His relationship with Larry Brown provides the clearest basketball example. Brown pushed Iverson consistently toward better practice habits, more trust in teammates, and tighter offensive structure. Iverson respected Brown, but repeatedly resisted becoming the type of player Brown envisioned. Their dynamic featured years of tension because neither man would fully surrender his position. Then came the 2002 press conference. After Philadelphia's playoff elimination, Iverson delivered what became one of the most famous interviews in sports history, spending several minutes focused on the word practice in a way that made clear the external criticism hadn't landed as intended. Years later, he maintained the message had been misunderstood, rather than acknowledging any validity to the critique itself. His style of play followed the same pattern: usage rates among the highest in league history during his prime, attacking defense the same way at 6 feet tall against larger guards with no meaningful adjustment for changing trends. Even late in his career, when a brief stint in Detroit required accepting a reduced role, Iverson openly expressed dissatisfaction rather than quietly adapting. He refused to change his appearance, his personality, and his game. That refusal helped turn him into one of the most influential figures in basketball history. Doc Rivers. Doc Rivers is the only coach in NBA history to be on the losing side of 3 separate playoff series after holding a 3-1 lead. The 2003 Orlando Magic lost to Detroit. The 2015 Clippers lost to Houston. The 2020 Clippers lost to Denver. All 3 times, a 3-1 advantage disappeared. Despite years of mounting criticism about those collapses, Rivers largely maintained that the public ignored how difficult it was to build those leads in the first place. In 2025, he publicly stated that he didn't receive enough credit for winning the first 3 games in those series, and described some of the criticism as unfair. That response, years after the final collapse, reflects a coach who remained committed to his own framing, regardless of how overwhelming the outside narrative had become. His rotation tendencies followed similar patterns across Boston, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and Milwaukee. Rivers consistently preferred veteran players over younger options, and teams under his coaching repeatedly received criticism for predictable rotations, slow adjustments, and reluctance to make dramatic tactical changes mid-series. Those criticisms followed him across 4 separate franchises over more than 2 decades. On the other side of the ledger, Rivers won the 2008 NBA championship, earned Coach of the Year, surpassed 1,100 career wins, and earned Hall of Fame induction. Because those results were real, he consistently pointed to them when defending his methods and rarely suggested his core philosophy needed fundamental revision. More than 25 years into his coaching career, he was still defending the same core positions he had always held. Dwight Howard. Dwight Howard's stubbornness came from a gap between how coaches and analysts saw him and how he saw himself. By the time he reached the Houston Rockets and Los Angeles Lakers, the consensus around the league was consistent. Howard was most effective as a rim-running, pick-and-roll center, elite rebound, elite defender, elite lob threat. That profile was enormously valuable to a well-constructed team. Howard largely rejected it. He wanted post-up touches. He wanted to be viewed as a dominant offensive centerpiece rather than a specialized big. Former Lakers coach Mike D'Antoni addressed it publicly, stating that many players understand their role but simply refuse to accept it, naming Howard directly in that context. The conflict wasn't limited to Los Angeles. Howard clashed with Stan Van Gundy in Orlando, with D'Antoni in Los Angeles, and with Kevin McHale in Houston. Different organizations, different coaches, different rosters, and the same recurring theme about role. Acceptance and offensive expectations kept surfacing. After Orlando, teams kept expecting a reset. Instead, similar complaints followed him through Houston, Atlanta, and Charlotte. Through all of it, Howard continued advocating for a larger offensive role. Even his back injuries reduced some of his athletic advantages, and the league steadily moved away from post-centric offenses entirely. The irony of his career is that his best late career stretch came when he finally accepted a specialist role during the 2020 Lakers championship run, playing as a defensive anchor and screen setter. That contrast makes everything that came before look even more stubborn in hindsight. The role he resisted for years was waiting for him the whole time. Vlade Divac. Divac held the 2nd overall pick in the 2018 NBA draft and passed on Luka. That single decision defines his entire tenure running the Sacramento Kings. What makes it fit the stubborn category isn't only that the decision was wrong. Executives make wrong decisions constantly. It's that Divac had every possible advantage to get it right and passed anyway. He grew up in the former Yugoslavia. He understood European basketball at a level most American executives simply didn't possess. He had watched EuroLeague prospects for years firsthand and knew that world better than virtually anyone else in an NBA front office. Sacramento selected Marvin Bagley III instead. Luka won Rookie of the Year, became a perennial MVP candidate, made multiple All-NBA first teams, and transformed Dallas into a consistent contender. Bagley struggled to establish himself and was eventually moved. As Luka's dominance became undeniable, Divac still resisted a clean admission of error. In 2024, years after Luka had become one of the best players on the planet, Divac stated that time will tell on the Bagley decision. Reports surrounding the draft suggested Sacramento prioritized positional fit around De'Aaron Fox rather than taking the best available player, with some accounts suggesting Divac believed the two couldn't coexist in the same backcourt. That same draft also included Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jalen Brunson, Trae Young, and Mikal Bridges. The refusal to publicly reverse course years later, despite evidence being as clear as it gets in the NBA, is precisely why Divac remains one of the most discussed executives in recent draft history. Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant never needed external validation to keep going. He needed competition. His entire career was built around refusing to accept that anything was beyond him, and that belief produced constant friction. The most famous example is his relationship with Shaq. The two won 3 consecutive championships from 2000 through 2002, arguably the most dominant pairing the NBA had seen in years. Despite winning 3 straight titles together, the relationship kept deteriorating because Kobe refused to permanently accept a secondary role behind a Hall of Fame center in his prime. He believed he could carry a championship team himself. Shaq believed the franchise still belonged to him. Neither yielded. Shaq was eventually traded in 2004. After that, Kobe faced sustained criticism for shooting volume during several seasons where he led the league in scoring while routinely drawing double and triple teams. Many analysts pushed for a more pass-first approach. The 2005 to 2006 season became a defining example. Kobe averaged 35.4 points per game, the highest single-season scoring average since Michael Jordan's 1986 to 1987 season. Rather than adjusting to satisfy critics, he escalated. His Mamba mentality wasn't a marketing phrase. Former teammates described training habits most professionals couldn't sustain, including early morning workouts and extra shooting sessions that became legendary throughout the league. After tearing his Achilles in 2013, he attempted to return as the same superstar, rather than accepting a reduced profile. 5 championships, 18 All-Star appearances, 15 All-NBA selections, and over 33,000 career points came from someone who simply refused to accept limitations. Mark Cuban. Mark Cuban bought the Dallas Mavericks in 2000 and immediately made clear he wasn't going to behave like a traditional NBA owner. Most owners manage from a distance. Cuban sat courtside, argued with referees on the spot, publicly challenged league decisions, and accumulated millions of dollars in fines from the league office over the year. After repeated punishments, he rarely changed his behavior for long. He also believed strongly in his own analytical instincts before it was fashionable to do so. Cuban invested heavily in technology, charter travel, player nutrition, sports science, and analytics years before most franchises caught up. When those ideas were questioned, he stayed committed. Many eventually became standard practices across the entire league. His roster-building approach reflected the same personality. Throughout Dirk Nowitzki's prime, Cuban aggressively pursued stars and major moves rather than standing pat. That approach produced the 2011 championship, one of the most celebrated upsets in finals history. It also produced controversy. Steve Nash departed in free agency. Jalen Brunson left for New York without meaningful compensation. Even after criticism, Cuban generally defended the reasoning behind his decision, rather than publicly admitting mistakes. He openly discussed tanking strategy in ways most owners actively avoided, challenging league positions on the subject directly and consistently arguing from his own perspective, regardless of the controversy generated. He challenged commissioners, referees, league policies, ownership conventions, and media narratives across more than 2 decades. Even after selling controlling interest in the Mavericks, he remained publicly vocal about franchise decisions, demonstrating the same willingness to say exactly what he believed, regardless of the audience or circumstances. Darvin Ham. Darvin Ham spent the 2023-24 Lakers season under near constant scrutiny over his rotation decision, and he largely responded by defending those decisions rather than dramatically changing course. The criticism was consistent throughout the year. Fans, analysts, and reporters questioned why players like Taurean Prince and Cam Reddish were receiving significant minutes, while other options sat on the bench. Ham generally stayed committed to his evaluation, regardless of the volume of outside criticism. Lineup instability added to the frustration. The Lakers cycled through numerous starting lineups across the season. Ham pointed to injuries and roster availability as major contributing factors. Critics argued that some of those decisions were self-inflicted rather than injury-driven, and the back and forth continued for months without resolution. Reports eventually emerged describing internal frustration within the organization regarding rotations and adjustments, with accounts suggesting players and personnel had serious questions about some of the decisions being made throughout the year. Rather than acknowledging major strategic failures, Ham consistently explained the reasoning behind his choices, pointed to circumstances beyond his control, and expressed continued belief in his overall process. When the Lakers fired him in 2024, Ham publicly expressed surprise at the decision and suggested that coaches in similar circumstances frequently received extensions rather than dismissals. That response said a lot about where his head was. After one of the most scrutinized coaching seasons in recent Lakers history, his primary public reaction was that he likely should have kept his job. What separates Ham from others on this list is that his stubbornness was never confrontational. He simply believed in his methods and defended them consistently throughout the entire tenure. Rajon Rondo. Rajon Rondo may have been the most intellectually stubborn player of his generation because his refusal to change came directly from his certainty that he understood basketball better than almost everyone around him. Former Celtics personnel consistently described him as one of the smartest players they had ever worked with. The problem was that Rondo often believed that intelligence extended above the coaches on the sideline. That belief led to documented tensions with Doc Rivers, Rick Carlisle, George Karl, Alvin Gentry, and Jim Boylan across different stops throughout his career. He openly questioned play calls, defensive schemes, and coaching decisions in ways most players simply never would. The most dramatic example came during the 2015 playoffs in Dallas. Rondo had been acquired specifically to help the Mavericks make a deep run. During a first-round series against Houston, he clashed repeatedly with Carlisle along the sideline. The relationship collapsed within months of his arrival, and he effectively stopped playing meaningful minutes for the franchise. A partnership designed to help a contender ended before the series was finished. As the NBA evolved into a spacing and shooting league, Rondo largely kept playing his original game. He prioritized passing over scoring, preferred controlling pace, and rarely embraced high-volume three-point shooting. His assist-first mentality stayed intact, regardless of how the league changed around him. 4 All-Star appearances, 4 All-Defensive Team selections, 3 assist titles, and 2 championships came from that approach, which only reinforced his confidence in it. That combination of elite intelligence and consistent results made him genuinely difficult to coach because he usually had a logical reason for believing he was right. Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan's stubbornness as a player came from a source most athletes never access: the absolute belief that no challenge was bigger than his will to overcome it. The Detroit Pistons developed the Jordan rules specifically to stop him, a set of physical defensive principles built around wearing him down through repeated hard contact. Many elite scorers would have adjusted their approach significantly to avoid the punishment. Jordan attacked the basket anyway, season after season, and eliminated Detroit in the 1991 playoffs. Even minor perceived slights became fuel. Teammates and coaches described a player who turned trash talk, contract disputes, draft decisions, and individual plays into long-term motivation, sometimes holding on to things for years afterward. After winning 3 championships and retiring in 1993, he came back. After winning 3 more championships and retiring again, he came back at age 38 with Washington because he still believed he could compete against elite NBA players. As an owner with Charlotte, the same personality showed up differently. Jordan resisted full-scale tanking strategies during much of his ownership tenure, preferring to remain competitive even when a complete rebuild may have produced better long-term outcomes. As analytics became increasingly influential across the league, the Hornets were frequently viewed as lagging behind more analytically driven organizations. He remained majority owner from 2010 through 2023, largely sticking with his organizational philosophy despite consistent criticism of the franchise's performance. Draft choices reflecting his own evaluations drew scrutiny. The confidence in his own judgment that made him the greatest player in NBA history carried directly into how he ran the front office throughout his entire ownership tenure. Stan Van Gundy. Stan Van Gundy built a coaching career on blunt honesty and unwavering basketball principles, and no moment captured that better than what happened in Orlando in 2012. During widespread reports that Dwight Howard wanted him fired, Van Gundy addressed the situation directly and openly with reporters. Seconds later, Howard walked in and stood beside him. The exchange became one of the most memorable coach-player moments in league history. Most coaches would have found a quieter, more diplomatic path. Van Gundy said what he believed and dealt with the consequences. His Orlando teams were built around spacing, and Howard at the rim, years before that approach became standard across the league. He surrounded Howard with shooters and built one of the NBA's more sophisticated early modern offenses, reaching the 2009 finals in the process. When critics questioned the approach, he defended it consistently. He also treated stars and role players by the same standards throughout his career, which occasionally created tension but earned consistent respect from players who valued accountability. During his Detroit tenure as president and coach, Van Gundy acquired Blake Griffin in a major trade and made several other significant roster decisions that drew criticism from analysts and fans. He consistently defended the reasoning behind those moves, regardless of the public reaction. His communication style never changed. Whether speaking to players, media, front offices, or later as a broadcaster, Van Gundy said exactly what he thought in every setting. Once he formed a basketball opinion, he held it. His views on spacing, defense, team construction, and player accountability stayed remarkably stable throughout a career that produced multiple 50-win seasons and one of the most influential early modern offenses in league history. Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving was 25 years old when he requested a trade away from the Cleveland Cavaliers in the summer of 2017. Cavaliers had just reached the NBA Finals for the third consecutive year. LeBron James was the best player in the world and was Irving's teammate. Most players in that situation would have stayed as long as possible. Irving wanted out because he wanted to lead his own team rather than continue being viewed as a secondary piece alongside LeBron. Cleveland traded him to Boston. In his first full season with the Celtics, Irving publicly stated he intended to re-sign when he became a free agent. As his tenure progressed and relationships with the organization and teammates deteriorated, Irving remained committed to his own perspective rather than adjusting to meet expectations. He left anyway. In Brooklyn, the Nets assembled one of the most talented rosters in modern NBA history, alongside Kevin Durant and James Harden. Organizational conflicts and Irving's personal decisions repeatedly created friction throughout the partnership. The most expensive personal stand of his career came during the COVID-19 vaccine mandate period. Under New York City regulations, Irving was ineligible to play in home games without vaccination. He refused, despite knowing it would cost him significant playing time and millions of dollars. He held that position for an extended period regardless of the financial and competitive consequences. What makes Irving unique on this list is that external criticism has almost never changed his behavior. 8 All-Star selections, multiple All-NBA teams, a championship ring, and the game-winning three-pointer in Game 7 of the 2016 Finals all came from someone who made it consistently clear that outside approval was never the measuring stick he used for any decision. Dennis Rodman. Dennis Rodman won 5 championships, made 8 all-defensive teams, earned 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards, and led the NBA in rebounding for 7 consecutive seasons. He also missed practices, took vacations during the season, dyed his hair constantly, and generated more headlines off the court than most players generate in their entire careers. The stubbornness started with the work itself. Former teammates and coaches described Rodman spending enormous amounts of time analyzing shot trajectories, spin angles, and missed shot tendencies in a way no other player in the league was doing at that time. Once he developed his rebounding methods, he rarely changed them regardless of outside input or coaching instruction. The San Antonio years show how far he would push things. By the mid-1990s, Rodman had become increasingly difficult for the Spurs to manage. Conflicts developed with coach Bob Hill and members of the organization. Even with San Antonio as a playoff team, the Spurs eventually traded arguably the best rebounder in basketball for a modest return, rather than continue dealing with the dynamic. The Bulls took the gamble and brought him in under Phil Jackson's highly structured system. Even there, Rodman remained exactly Rodman. The same characteristics that made him challenging in San Antonio surfaced in Chicago too. Jackson found ways to manage it, and Rodman delivered 3 championships in return. What separates Rodman from every other stubborn personality on this list is the direction of his stubbornness. Most people here resisted adapting to what organizations wanted from them. Rodman forced organizations to adapt entirely around him and operated under different rules than virtually every other player throughout the championship run in Chicago. Donald Sterling. Donald Sterling purchased the franchise that became the Los Angeles Clippers in 1981 and spent the next 3+ decades demonstrating what stubbornness looks like at the ownership level. Between the early 1980s and early 2010s, the Clippers endured one of the worst sustained stretches of losing in professional sports. Former players, coaches, and executives repeatedly and publicly criticized how the organization was operating. Sterling reached the playoffs only sporadically during most of his tenure. Commissioner David Stern fined Sterling multiple times over the years for various comments and conduct issues. Even after league discipline, the behavior largely continued without meaningful change. The defining moment came in 2014 when audio recordings became public in which Sterling made racist comments during a private conversation. The reaction was immediate and total. Players threatened boycotts, sponsors withdrew, political leaders commented publicly. The entire league unified against him. Even then, Sterling's first instinct was to fight rather than step aside. He pursued legal action and challenged the NBA's attempt to force a sale of the franchise. Rather than acknowledging what had occurred and facilitating a transition, he contested the entire process. The league imposed a lifetime ban, and the Clippers sold for a record $2 billion to Steve Ballmer. What puts Sterling in a category of his own is the duration. For more than 30 years, he faced criticism from fans, media, players, coaches, fellow owners, and the league commissioner. His approach rarely changed meaningfully. Unlike most stubborn figures, who eventually adjust under sufficient pressure, Sterling spent 3 decades resisting nearly every attempt to alter how he operated. His removal from the league wasn't a choice. It was a forced outcome, after everything else had already failed. If you enjoyed this, I'm going to be posting a lot here. I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe. Thanks for watching.